Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gut Girls podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about yeast. And when I say that, if you're the type of person that you have Googled candida symptoms, yeast overgrowth, why do I feel worse after eating sugar? So maybe you are suspecting that there's yeast or something. This episode is for you. We really want to kind of dive in today to those that are kind of exhausted by Googling those symptoms, trying to figure out, what they're doing, what direction should I go? What should I not do? What should I do? Most people, a lot of our listeners are women. And so, and a lot of the people that we work with are women, and they come to us they're wanting more information. They're wanting to understand, like, what does that mean? What does candida mean? What does yeast mean? Is it overgrown? Is it bad? Do I have it regularly? What's going on with my body, and what do I need to do next? And so that's where we're going to kind of dive in today and talk about all of those things, not necessarily in a fear-based way, but just like in a non-restrictive way, in a just providing some education around what that looks like. And so if you have Googled some of those symptoms and some of what you think may be sugar issues or yeast issues or whatever, you've probably been told through Google or whoever, I need to cut sugar. I need to cut carbohydrates because obviously that is sugar. I need to do some sort of a major like yeast cleanse or some kind of like a fast or something like that. Maybe you've been told to take antifungals. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. And so the problem is that a lot of times these women end up coming back to us, and they're like, hey, I've Googled all these symptoms, but I'm still failing. Like, I really still suspect yeast. And so I tried these things, and actually I feel worse now than I did before. So let's talk about how yeast is not really, we're all about looking for the root problem. And usually the yeast is not the root problem when we see that on a GI map test. It's more of a signal, right? And so today let's break down a little bit. And Angela, I'm going to kind of turn this over to you a little bit to tell us, like, why does yeast show up, and why do some people feel like they're doing everything right? How do we look at yeast when we do look at the gut and the GI map test, and how do we kind of personalize that for some of our clients?
Yeah, I love that we're doing this topic today because yeast affects so much more. I think women think about like maybe vaginal yeast infections or yeast on the skin. Guys, it affects your brain, it affects your hormones. And let's start with the truth, like Diana said. The truth is that yeast lives in everybody's gut. But the issue isn't that the yeast is there, it's the yeast overgrowing when the environment in your body allows it to. And so that's what Diana was alluding to, is what we typically see at let's say the root of yeast and why it's overgrowing is the beneficial bacteria are low. So guys, that's your good bacteria. The good bacteria are depleted, they're deficient. Potentially digestion is weak. So there's, someone with chronic constipation. We know the digestive system is weak. And in that type of environment, yeast can just grow rampant. Or we also see things like the gut immune system being suppressed. So that chronic suppressed immune system, that could be the person that's like, I'm constantly getting sick. Or funny enough, that could also be the person that's like, I never get sick. And that could be because the immune system is so weak that it can't even mount a response to, some kind of bacterial or viral infection. Also, blood sugar is typically unstable in these people let's say these bodies that just allow for yeast to continue to overgrow. So it can go back to blood sugar instability. And then the one that I think that gets the least talked about is the nervous system under chronic stress. So you guys know, if you've listened to past podcasts with us, that when stress is chronic and not addressed, what it does is it signals your cortisol response, which puts you in this constant fight or flight state. And when that happens, digestion is not taking place. Your stomach acid is decreased, and it's that kind of environment that yeast is just so responsive to, and it loves to be in that environment. And so this doesn't just come down to like a willpower thing. It's not like, hey, maybe I have yeast because I'm constantly having this craving. It doesn't come down to that. You can't just shut that craving off. It actually goes back to that saying, you are what you eat, right? So if you are eating and living a lifestyle in a way that just speaks to this growth of yeast, then that is why, ladies, you may never have gotten full control of your yeast to begin with. So let me go back a little bit deeper, because Dana, you did touch upon something, and this is something I do want women to also really hear. When we see yeast all the time in women, and some of them will even say, I think they'll term it like, I'm doing everything right. You and I hear that all the time. I'm doing everything right. So you guys are talking about digestion, and I am eating very clean, I'm moving my body, the sugar thing, I'm not even really overdoing it. So I feel like I'm disciplined, and I feel like I'm consistent, but I cannot shake the yeast. And that, guys, I want you to kind of know this goes back to that nervous system, but another reason as to why. It's because yeast doesn't just respond to the diet, it responds to load. So what that means is load on your nervous system, load on your blood sugar regulation, load on your immune system, load on your ability to recover. And sometimes that load, this is key. And I think this is where a lot of people are going to be like, oh, okay, now I'm starting to understand. Sometimes that load comes from skipping a meal. So if that's you, raise your hand, even though I can't see you because you guys are listening. If that's you, this could be the reason. Maybe you eat clean, right? Maybe you eat very clean. Maybe you work out all the time, but you don't eat often enough. Maybe you underfuel, right, Dana? We hear that all the time. Maybe you unintentionally underfuel by skipping a meal. Maybe you're not getting enough protein. Maybe you're eating clean, right? But let's go back to that blood sugar thing where you're just not getting enough protein in every meal. Or, maybe you are the person that overdoes the caffeine throughout the day. So you are eating clean and you are exercising, but you have too much caffeine in the system, and that also spikes cortisol. And like I just said, then we go back to this whole blood sugar dysregulation issue. And so I want you to hear that sometimes what matters is it's not, about doing everything right. It's about doing too much for too long. And so I think that's something that's chronically not talked about.
And, this is kind of the hard truth that I'm about to share too, but this is where the conversation happens with alcohol, sleep, not sleeping well. And then of course, obviously you've kind of been hitting on this already, where that stress load is just too much. And so I'm going to back up to the first one I said, because I'm sure some people are like cringing. They're like, no, alcohol. I really love to unwind with my glass or two or three or bottle of wine every night. But guys, the alcohol, and I shared before that I have had times of my life where I've definitely had more alcoholic beverages than others. This is something that I've chosen. You can go back a couple of episodes and listen to, why I've chosen not to have alcohol. And this is one of those reasons because it does kind of tip the scale for me. So like when we talked about the pillars and stress and all of this load that we have. And then, so if we're already kind of like bogging down a little bit, then, and I'm using my hands as gestures here for those of you that are watching, but, once you kind of have that down, then you talk about having alcohol that is going to obviously affect our blood sugar. It's going to affect our detox pathways. It's going to affect the liver, which, the detox pathways with the liver and everything, and all of that, how that really plays a role in our overall well-being. So alcohol is going to play a big role in that. And so when you kind of keep bogging down, you're already under the stressful load. Maybe it's really hard for you to have, you're in this season of life where it's hard for you to like choose nutritious meals and things. And then you feel like at the end of the night, you need to wind down with this alcohol, guys. It's affecting your blood sugar, therefore affecting your sleep, therefore masking some of the symptoms and things that you may be experiencing, and possibly contributing to a yeast problem. And so that's one thing that I've kind of been open about, that I've realized that even though I felt like at the time I was kind of doing everything right during the day, I feel like I had focused on my nutrition, I'd focused on all of those things, but then I came home and felt like I was unwinding with, several White Claws or beers or whatever it was at night. And it was, even though I wasn't, maybe having face breakouts or whatever, it was kind of just like tipping that scale and not allowing my body this like safe place to heal. Right. And so, that doesn't necessarily mean my body was broken. It just means that I have to like make some adjustments.
Yeah, I love that you talk about making the adjustments, because I think that's what it is. It's learning what adjustments your in particular body needs, right? That's really what women come to us asking. They're like, I need clarity about my body. So let's touch upon that. If you are listening and you're like, okay, help me know my body. You had heard me say blood sugar was one of the biggest drivers of yeast. And so that's often tied to insulin resistance. So guys, that does not mean you have to have full-blown diabetes to have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance can show up in a different way. So here's the clarity that you may need. It can look like this. So if any of these sound like you, or you're like, oh, that's me, maybe there is an insulin, let's say, I don't want to say resistance, but insulin dysfunction. And then this is why maybe the yeast keeps showing up for you. So blood sugar dysregulation can look like needing caffeine to function. We've all heard, or maybe you are that one that's like, I need to wake up and hit the coffee pot. That's definitely needing caffeine to function. And that could be driving your insulin instability. If you are someone that has crashing mid-afternoon, that could be a sign of blood sugar instability. And that may not necessarily be due to caffeine. It could be due to what you're eating. Maybe it's a large carbohydrate lunch, and then you find every day after that large carbohydrate lunch, you crash. So it could be the carbohydrates. What about for those women that feel worse when you skip a meal? So if you are that person listening and you're like, yes, I actually get shaky, a little bit anxious, or extremely tired if I skip a meal, that could be a signal that blood sugar is something you might want to address. Or also that person who is craving sugar when they're stressed, that also could be a sign. When blood sugar swings, I want you to understand that the immune system takes a hit. So it's interesting, because then yeast takes advantage in that point and in that moment. And a lot of women will say, well, yeah, that I've talked to, they'll say, yes, I do sometimes skip meals, and then I know I have to eat because I start to have that like slight crash, or we, in our culture, we'll call it like hanger state, where they get a little bit moody, anxious, exhausted. And they're like, so then I go eat. But it's also educating them, guys, that's actually too late. Like when that feeling hits, when you're a little bit shaky or anxious because you skipped a meal, or your mood starts to swing where you're a little bit more angry, the blood sugar, the cortisol has already shot up, and the blood sugar swing is already in effect. So you actually want to make sure that you hit the meal before that happens. That's why skipping meals can be one of the, honestly, reasons that yeast is not, you can't shake it from your body, because you didn't address that issue. And then this is also why cutting carbs alone doesn't fix yeast, because we hear that all the time, Diana, right? It's like, well, what's interesting to me is someone will say like, I know I have yeast, so I'm doing a Candida diet. And I'm like, oh, tell me what that is. And it's like 0 carbs, right? And like cutting out all the sugar. And then they're like, but it's not working. I'm not getting results. And so I want to remind you, it's more about stability. Think stability of blood sugar all day long, versus just cutting out the carbs and the sugar.
Mm-hmm. I love that you use the word stability, because that's kind of what comes to my mind first, where a lot of times people really, the women that come to us and they have this problem, they want, they want a pill or a supplement or something, they want to do a GI map test first, right off the bat. And this is why we teach in our membership and everything that we do, we teach about stability. We teach about the routine, about lifestyle habits. So even though we're about to dive in a little bit deeper, I almost want to start it off by saying the foundations are what's so important. Some women need, maybe more consistent meals, maybe more protein. Some of those things, of course, make such a big difference. But it's really about doing all of those things. We've talked about the pillars the last few weeks, and with the sleep, with the stress, with the nutrition, with movement. I would really encourage you, and I know sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed. Like, where do I start if I feel like I have this yeast? So that's why I'm telling you, you technically, if you wanted to, don't do this, but you could stop listening after I say this. Go back to our basics guide. Really, and you can make so much progress doing that, because we do talk about those pillars, and we talk about them specifically and exactly like what we would suggest doing to create these new habits and create that foundation for you. And so if you need to stop there, that's fine. You can pause it, come back to this episode later and be like, okay, now what's the rest? But we want you to have the foundation first. So once you've been doing all of those things and you've done the foundational work and you still feel like, hey, I'm still finding myself Googling these yeast problems and candida, like I think it's candida and whatever. So like, help me figure out, like, how do I kind of personalize it? Like, just tell me what to do. That's what I feel like, that's what people come to us. So Angela, dive a little bit deeper and tell us about like all the things that can affect this and like what we need to do, sort of like what are our next steps?
Yeah, and even before I do that, Dana, you had mentioned some women just need more protein. I've heard so many women say, but I don't even know what protein is. You have mentioned that about one of our clients. That was she's like, I don't even know where to start. What is protein? What do I need more of? So the basics guide that, like Dana said, our nutrition guide, those lay it out for you. It couldn't be more clear. So that's why going back to those basics can be so helpful. And like Dana said, there's a little bit to the story about like, think of yeast and hormones, yeast and medications, and then just yeast and different life seasons. All of this plays a role. And this is why, I'll just say it one more time, there's not like a one size fits all when it comes to clearing yeast out of the body. What we see with women is there's also seasons of life that yeast show up a little bit more. So that's postpartum for sure. Also during, I should say, like in pregnancy. Pregnancy is a big one, postpartum, and then perimenopause and menopause. Because estrogen, the shifts in estrogen in all of those seasons are different for each woman. And then estrogen shifts alone affect your gut immunity and your microbial balance. And so understanding, this is also why there's not a one size fits all, because every woman is in a different phase of life and every woman's estrogen levels are different. They are. And so that's important to know. And that's something that, like, even when you're working in a community like the Gut Girls, we can help you figure out. Okay. And then I also just want to mention, and I'm going to have Diana go into this a little bit more, but medications are also, they play a huge role in yeast. And so I don't want to forget that it's not just tell me what to eat. It's also, what are you currently doing that could be driving the yeast more? So Diana, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to my mind, because you were just talking about hormones, is birth control pills. And we're not going to go into a big, thing about that, but I'm just saying that long-term use of those things can be some of the things that increase those yeast levels with some of our clients. And so if that's you and you've been on birth control for a long time, that might be something that you want to evaluate and kind of look at. Antibiotics, a lot of times people think like, oh, I can just take antibiotic for, strep throat or some sort of infection or whatever. And hear me say, I am not saying that we're against antibiotics, because there's absolutely a time and a place for those, but overuse of them and long-term use of them over multiple times can, just like Angela said, affect the gut microbiome, suppressing the immune system, suppressing the good bacteria. And so then you have this kind of like healthy host for this yeast to start thriving because of the use of those antibiotics. And so then you have this imbalance of the bacteria. And, I'm going to go way into time, back into time, into 2017, when I tested positive for a parasite on my GI map test. And I know we're talking about yeast, but parasites are somewhat similar. I still remember you saying to me, Diana, like, look, you weren't even like freaking out about the parasite. I saw it and I'm like, holy smokes, what is going on? But you were like, it's because your host is not healthy. And I'm like, what the heck do you mean the host? And so we looked at the rest of the GI map test and we found that my gut was lacking a lot of those beneficial bacteria. I had had years of antibiotic use. I had tried different medications and prescriptions and, lots of different things. And it had depleted my good bacteria and allowed for this parasite to be able to live and thrive and do what it wanted to do and kind of like stall my digestion and all of the things. And so it's that whole picture that brings that whole puzzle together. But other things that people use, steroids and things like after we've had a virus or a flu or something like that, and or a sinus infection, a lot of times they'll give us these, big steroid packs and stuff like that. That can affect it. Of course, SSRIs as well can do that too. So there's so many things that kind of play into that, and it generally doesn't happen like overnight. Sometimes I've kind of seen that happen where people can like really put a finger on it because they're like, I went to the hospital, they gave me these major amounts of antibiotics, and I know that's when this shift happened. But a lot of times it kind of happens over the years, right? And this host is not really kind of like what it needs to look like. And so again, going back to the yeast from my parasite, it's kind of similar. And that's why we love, once these people do come to us, they've done the foundational work. They've really kind of taken a dive into like the nutrition and tried to remove the alcohol, remove the sugar. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm still lost. Like, what do I do now? And that's why we love the GI map test, which is a comprehensive stool test. And Angela, you are the gut expert here. You're one of the gut experts here. And so I love that about you. I love that you research this GI map test and how it does go deeper and how we can kind of understand how to sort of get rid of this yeast, but also prepare the host for it as well. So tell us a little bit more about the GI map and yeast.
Yeah, this is where context matters more than labels. Like, so instead of if you do a GI map, or if you come to us with like, that's just it. Like, I have chronic yeast, help, or you do a GI map and you see yeast. That's like with the parasites with Diana. I was like, actually take your mind off of that for a second. So like, let's almost dislabel you about candida or yeast, because I think it's not just asking, is the yeast present, but you're asking about the environment, right? So is digestion strong enough? Are beneficial bacteria depleted, or are they, is there a variety, and are they pretty robust? Is the gut immune system suppressed? Is there inflammation that breaks down the gut lining barrier? So those are the questions that really need to be asked versus, is yeast present or is it not? And that's why Dinah was talking about the GI map, and we love it so much, is because, guys, that's where we get to actually find these answers. Like, this is where we get this context of your digestive system, your good bacteria, your immune system. Because if we don't support that, like those foundational layers first, you could target yeast aggressively all you want. It's not necessarily going to get you the relief that you want. And that's what we see consistently day in and day out. In fact, I remember, and just to share with you guys, and this is coming from me who I honestly have never dealt with yeast my whole life. But postpartum, I remember having some issues with my placenta. And so I did have to get on some antibiotics. And like Diana said, it could just be like a short-term thing. I mean, with where I was postpartum, I had to do like a triple antibiotic therapy because of some placental issues, and I had yeast right away. And again, it's not something I deal with. It's not something I don't, chronically take antibiotics, but it came from just that high dose, and it was needed. The dose was needed, but I immediately noticed it in myself. And in fact, my newborn baby, it was showing up in her skin because I was breastfeeding her at the time. And so it could be something just like that. And to give a little bit more context to that season of life, guys, when you are postpartum, your immune system is so weak. I mean, you just gave so many of your nutrients to your baby in pregnancy. You just birthed a child, no matter how it is, C-section, vaginal, whatever it is, that's trauma that your body has to go through, even though it's natural trauma. So your immune system, after all that, is the weakest postpartum. That's why we see so much yeast show up postpartum. And so I think, again, giving you the GI map shows, again, all of this context, but really understanding the season of your life and the context, I think is what's going to give you the biggest answer.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that, a lot of times people can just like you said, stop the guessing, because that's exhausting. I did what I call the cycle of trial and error. My goodness, I had diagnosed myself with so many different things. And again, it wasn't yeast at the time, but it was more about the host that wasn't healthy, right? And so I was so relieved when I was able to stop guessing and do the foundational work, get the GI map test, and have some answers so that I could see exactly what I was dealing with, and also have you as my gut coach, right? I mean, that was so important. And so that's one thing that I love with the Gut Girls is we're constantly trying to educate people, and that's one thing that we've changed a little bit. It used to be we just, people would say, I just want a protocol. Just tell me exactly what to take and when. And we're like, no, you really have to do all the foundational work too. And we explain why and how to do that, because what we want is for you to be able to do this alongside of us for the rest of your life, to almost become your own mini gut expert. And so I love that we kind of get that GI map test to kind of give us a little bit of a roadmap alongside of that foundational work.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting when you were talking about what we do in the Gut Girls is when people want that education, guys, we have at this point coached thousands of women. And so the way that we do it is without overwhelm. We know you want to be educated. We know you want to know what to do, but it's giving you this foundational support without feeling overwhelmed, like Diana was in her journey, like she just talked about. And so we typically break it down into real support in real time that can be as simple as this. Maybe it's for you, we teach you consistent nourishment. What does that look like for you in your season of life? Maybe it's what I talked about before, just getting adequate protein in. Maybe you're the one that's I just need to learn how to hit 100 grams or more of protein a day. And so if that's you, maybe that is a blood sugar stability issue that you have and you don't know it. Maybe you are eating as clean as you possibly can, but unintentionally not getting enough protein in. Just a little bit of coaching and foundational tools can put you right over the edge of getting clearer results in real time. Maybe for you, it's teaching you about digestive support. As simple as, hey, around a meal, chew your food, breathe before you take, your first bite of food, put your fork down in between meals. We teach you in the Gut Girls about digestive bitters that you can add through food or supplements, whatever route you choose to aid in digestion. And then maybe for others, it's nervous system regulation. Maybe you don't even know what that means, but you're chronically stressed. And so you have maybe some insight that that's affecting your blood sugar stability. And so for you, maybe it's teaching you the little cues that your body is telling you when to stop, when to set a boundary for rest, how to give your nervous system, the additional support it needs through grounding or, whatever that may be. We are here to teach you those for the individual seasons and for the individual woman, because there's not two bodies that are alike when it comes to yeast.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you kind of hit on all those foundational things that we talked about before, because you'll notice that nothing in there, we talk about doing some kind of massive yeast cleanse or candida cleanse or, something like that. Because guys, if you'll remember, we actually talked about cleanses and detoxes and stuff on previous podcasts. And a lot of times what happens when you do those, depending on what you do, a lot of times you're ridding yourself of the good bacteria. So just like I talked about before, where I didn't have enough of the good bacteria, so you're almost feeding this yeast even more because you're stressing out your body even more. So it's kind of this vicious cycle sometimes with yeast. And that's what people will say. They feel that way a lot. And so that's kind of for all of these reasons, this is why we built the Gut Girls Hub. Over the years, we've developed I don't know, I can't even think, like over 50 probably resources of different, like we literally have a resource library where we talk about all these different sort of personal wellness strategies. We talk about foundational tools. We have guides. We have all kinds of stuff inside this like Gut Girls Hub to be able to walk alongside people in these different seasons that we kind of talk about.
Yeah, and so it's not like, in the Gut Girls portal in the hub that we're like, here's everything, right? It's more like, here's what matters for you, for your individual body, for your individual season. You learn your gut pattern. I mean, if you are the woman listening that's like, tell me what to do. Guys, it couldn't be more clearer. It's not that, again, that we're just like, here's what to do. What we do is we're like, here's your gut pattern. We couldn't be more clear because we know that through the GI map test. So it's like, here is on paper, lab report, your gut pattern. And then that tells you what your body needs first instead of doing everything that Dr. Google told you need to do. And it tells you how to move forward without the fear. It's actually confidence. Once you see that GI map, and if you guys haven't listened, there's a podcast a few sessions back. We interviewed one of our gut members, Mark Andre, and literally this is what he said. It was, I was able to take a step without fear. And that came from someone who was living in complete fear. That alone, just hearing that, like your shoulders could just drop because you're like, wow, that's what I've been doing for years. So if you are the woman that's thinking, I just want someone to help me understand my body, we are here for you. This Gut Girl space is for you.
Yeah, and the yeast, remember, if you take anything away, it's just like I talked about with my parasite, with yeast, whatever it is like that. It's really making sure that you do the foundational work because your body isn't broken. It's craving something else. And so you have to kind of figure out how to get that back into balance. And that's what we're here for, to walk alongside you and be your gut health coaches and do this in community. And so if this, hopefully this helped some of you out there that maybe that's something that you're Googling and looking at, and you've tried antifungals and you've tried medications and all these different things. Maybe it's like, hey, I need to kind of like, this sounds crazy, but I need to go back to the basics and get that right. Then maybe I should consider a GI map test and working with these gut health coaches to see if I can really kind of get to the nitty gritty and to the root of it instead of it being just a bunch of guessing, right? So if that's you, we would love for to be a part of your journey and help you any way that we can. And we do that through our membership hub. And the best way to do that is you can go to our website, or you can also book a free discovery call from our website, and we're happy to talk to you for 10-15 minutes for free and just kind of see what makes sense for you. A lot of times that doesn't mean some massive investment. Sometimes we just tell you like, hey, we think you should start here, and that's what we try to do instead of like, a lot of times you walk into a functional practitioner's office, or if you've ever called or whatever, you're like, oh my gosh, just to get into that person is $400 to even like have a conversation with them. And so we're offering to do that as a free consultation, just where we just talk for a minute and see what makes sense for you. Like what type of investment should you make, not just financially, but just for your time commitment, for your emotional commitment. Maybe you just need to start with those foundational tools and then dive deeper a little bit later. So that's what we're here for, is to kind of coach you through that. So head over to our website. It's gutgirls.health, and we will catch you on the next episode. The Gut Girls podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. We are not acting as licensed medical professionals. Always consult your doctor before making any changes to your health routine.